I'm doing it at this stage because, even though I should be retired, I'm not. And, I'm still considered active and all that. And I enjoy radio for what I do. But, again, the type of program I do is kind of like a throwback. I do it. It's a personality kind of a show made to sound like the 50s and 60s. Most radio stations today wouldn't put that on the air.
Yeah.
And they don't even want you to talk. It's like, play this music and shut up, and that's it. And, that's it. It's totally different. No more personalities. Forget it. We don't want that. And, but I hope I answered your questions. I don't know. I'm just trying to be like an umpire. I call it both ways. If it's great, it's great. If it's not, it's not. I think it's been fascinating. I've interviewed some of the biggest celebrities in the world, movie stars, politicians, sports heroes. That part's been really great and rewarding. And like I say, I've done it. So that's what I really went into radio for, probably. Somehow deep inside of me is this thing to be in the entertainment industry. But again, that part now today is it's different. I don't know if it's not possible, but it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you have the passion for it, you can get into it, it's going to be challenging, but as I said, I'm always up for a challenge, but not everybody is up for a challenge, but...
Yeah. Well, it depends on where you are in life. When you're 18 years old, and I don't know what kind of responsibilities you have, you sound like you're a pretty responsible guy. But when you're 18, it's different than when you're 38 or 58 or 68. You're going to have different obligations, too. Life gets in the way, and I don't mean in a bad way. But you have family and children and bills to pay and thinking about retirement and investing and all that. And you may have a passion for it, but you have to come to a reality. It's like, well, can I pay my bills with it?
Yeah.
Passion's one thing, and there's a middle ground somewhere between passion and reality.
Yeah.
Radio to me is like surfing, especially being on the air. It's like you're surfing on the surfboard and you're up on this big, high up wave, and all of a sudden, boom, it crashes. And now it's like, now what do I do? So, listen, the passion is great. I've had the passion. I still do. I think I'm more of a pragmatist at this point than I used to be. But, listen, everybody's got their own levels of how far they want to go for something.
Yeah.
So my levels are pretty high, but yours may be higher, which is a good thing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to, like you said, the passion, but then you got to think, will radio pay my bills? Can you make a career out of it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are in that vocation now use it as an avocation. One of my friends, who will go nameless, was the midday guy on a radio station in West Palm Beach, Florida. Pretty big station, and he had a pretty good following. And he was there for 14 years on that same station. No, was it 14? No, 20 years. 20 years on that same station. And a month or two ago, it's like, well, boom, we're making changes, and okay, Jack, nice knowing you, but, you're out. And that's it. They call you into the office one day, and they tell you you're gone. And that's something that people in this business have to realize, that sooner or later it's going to happen. And it's happened to the biggest people, So I say, you have to accept it and be prepared for it, and maybe have something else behind you where you can fall back on. It's not something for stability. And it's always been a very volatile business. And today, I don't even know, even if it's got as much to look forward to as far as being a stable business, probably a lot less. So I don't know. I don't have any advice. I mean, I'm not an expert. I've been around the business, and I've worked, in the New York area and Miami area, and now here in Knoxville, Tennessee, different radio markets. But the whole radio industry it's a very changed industry. And as you say, now I hope the pendulum will swing back the way it used to be. I'm not so sure. I mean, as much as I'd like it to be, I'm not so sure it will be. So if it's not, then we better be prepared to do something else. And we could say, hey, I've done it. It's been fun and all that. But, well, now what else can I do?
Yeah. Yeah, have a backup plan, something to fall back on if the radio gig goes south,
Well, yeah, and it's, like I say, you definitely need a backup plan. My advice is to get an education, number one. See, I was pretty dumb, honestly. I'll be the first to admit. Let's say short-sighted. I don't want to use the word dumb, but if I was smart, I would have gotten a degree in communications. And so take like Al Roker on NBC. The reason that I would watch the Today Show, even though it's not my favorite show, the only reason I would watch it at this point is because of Al Roker, who I find very entertaining and so on. But as entertaining as Al Roker is, he was smart. He got a degree in communications from Syracuse University, I believe, and he could go anywhere with that degree. So even if he's not on the air, somebody somewhere will hire him. If you don't have that little piece of paper, now you're just trying to make it on skill alone and entertainment alone, that's almost, it's very difficult to do that. So education, you can't go wrong by having credentials. The more credentials you have, it just is. People want to see it, whether it makes you a better person or more knowledgeable or whatever. It shows that you have a piece of paper, and at least corporately, that's what they want. Whether it's in radio or selling investments or almost anything, people want to see that piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah, education is key, especially these days, because if you don't have a diploma, or most people won't hire you, they won't even give you the time of day,
Yeah, that's right. And, we were talking about Walter Cronkite before. Now, he was educated. I don't know about his formal education. I don't know if he was even a college graduate or not. I'm assuming he was. But, Walter Cronkite came from, I believe, UPI, United Press International, before he got hired by CBS. So this is back in the 1940s. Mm-hmm. So Walter Cronkite was educated. It's just not educated in necessarily the formal way of education. So what people count as education, I question sometimes. For instance, Abraham Lincoln never went to college. Okay, that doesn't mean he wasn't educated. So people want to see a formal degree. You could have a degree in zoology and be hired somewhere, as opposed to real practical education and knowledge. And a lot of times, that doesn't even count.
Yeah. Yeah, the world...
This is how it is.
Yep, the world has changed drastically, but it's interesting, see where it goes.
Well, I hope it goes in a good way, and I really do. And we live in a very interesting time. Talking about going back in news and stuff like that. I lived through the JFK assassination. When JFK was assassinated in November 1963, I was 12 years old. And I remember a kid came running into the classroom like at 1:40 in the afternoon, telling everybody President Kennedy was shot. And, of course, nobody believed him. And then 20 minutes later, we found out President Kennedy died. So we all went home. We got out of school early that day. And for 4 days, we were glued to the television set. Now, these were the days of black and white TV. Very few people had color TV back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly wasn't cable. So people like Dan Rather, for instance, the first time that I can recall seeing Dan Rather on the air was because of the JFK assassination. And Dan Rather reported locally from Dallas. And so that's what made a big name for him. And when you look at the reporters that CBS at that time, Douglas Edwards and some of these other people, including Walter Cronkite, Charles Collingwood, all these people. Now today you don't have any of that. You really don't. And it was done, I guess, considered to be primitive compared to the way they do television today. You didn't have that technology, but yet we found out about it. And, it was more credible. And whether it was fake news or not, we didn't think it was fake news. And today, just because somebody says it's fake news doesn't make it fake news.
Yeah.
They just want some of their constituents to think it's fake news. Well, everything you could say is fake. There's people that don't believe that we ever landed on the moon, or the people don't believe that, Hitler's dead or whatever. I mean, you could say almost anything is fake. It all depends on what you want to believe. But I don't think it's fake news. I think people don't want to believe some of the news, but the news is the news.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, the JFK assassination, by the way, changed radio, too, as far as what we were playing on the air. Because in 1963, we were still listening to Elvis Presley and Leslie Gore and Ricky Nelson and all that, Chubby Checker. I mean, that was all good music, and I love it. But all of a sudden, by the end of 1963, we were so down in the dumps. Our morale was so low. And the Beatles came along, and all of a sudden, it's like this fresh sound coming out of England that nobody here heard before. And whether you think the Beatles were great or not, they would just crave for it because it sounded so different. And so I grew up at the height of the Beatles era, late 63. I was 12 years old, and the Beatles came here early 64. Their music just changed radio so much. Most of the top 40 radio stations around the country, out of the top 10, the Beatles probably had 5 or 6 at least that were in the top 10. That's how big they were. And so the Beatles changed our standards too. So a lot of things changed. And the 1960s was just a very interesting era, probably the most interesting era I could think of because of the music and the politics, civil rights and Vietnam and everything else that went on back then. We had so many things, assassinations with Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and all that. I can't think of any period that had more going on in one way or another than the 1960s. And so that, too, ingrained my interest in radio, and that's why I wanted to get to be part of it.
Yeah. It was a much more real time back then, much more reality, the 60s. Right.
Well, yeah, not necessarily in a good way, but it was reality, right. It was great and it was horrible at the same time. We landed on the moon, and yet, again, we had the JFK assassination, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, so many things, good and bad, happened in the 60s. And because of how it was reported, just that really did pique my curiosity a lot. And, the way radios were used. For instance, we all used to walk around with little transistor radios. And I remember when I got mine, it was like, they used to call it a 6 or an 8 transistor radio, depending on the power of the radio. Mm-hmm. AM radio, there's very little FM that was being used back then. And you know, that was it. And everybody had a radio